What's up everyone, welcome back, and I am here today with a video on a game from a franchise that I didn't think I would ever cover, Final Fantasy. I don't know why, but I've been on a binge with these older Final Fantasy games recently, so I figured, why not do a video on one of them? And for my first Final Fantasy video, I decided to go all the way back to the beginning with the one that I started with, and really the game that got me into JRPGs, the original Final Fantasy for the PSP. Now, some of you are probably wondering why I'm playing this version and not the more recent Pixel remaster. This is because the PSP version has quite a bit of pretty awesome side content, some new optional dungeons where you can battle bosses from other 2D Final Fantasy games, which I do want to do in this video. Actually, these 4 new dungeons were added in the Game Boy Advance version, but they carried over into every other version, and then they added a new dungeon in the PSP version that was in every other version, well, except for the Android version for some reason. Until the Pixel remaster where Square Enix told everyone to go screw themselves. They even delisted this version from online storefronts. Now, as for what to do, well, I've played this game dozens of times with every party combination imaginable, but I've never actually done a solo run. So why not do that and do it with my personal favorite, but also the worst class in the game, the Red Mage. The Red Mage is a jack-of-all-trades character. He has access to both white and black magic, and some swords and armor, and he's great early on, but the further into the game you get, the more his stats fall behind that of the other classes, and he's unable to use most of the higher tier spells and equipment that the other classes can. But let's see if he's good enough to beat the game on his own. Can you beat Final Fantasy with a single Red Mage? I am really feeling the nostalgia right now. I better hit new game before I start crying. Okay, so obviously the first party member is going to be our Red Mage, but as for the other classes, well, it doesn't really matter, but I guess I'll make them all Black Mages because they have the least HP and will be the easiest to let die, and that's all they're gonna do, just lay there and be dead, so I'm going to name them appropriately. The story is blah blah, some kind of evil force or darkness or something, and the 4, or in this case 1, Warrior of Light needs to restore 4 crystals or else darkness will fall over or something. This game isn't exactly story heavy like the games that succeeded it, but the series had to start somewhere. Before doing anything, I immediately get into a random encounter, let all the party members die so that only the Red Mage is standing, and then go into town and buy all of our essential equipment. And the Red Mage is able to use almost everything here, and he can learn almost all magic too. We can only teach him 3 spells of the same level though, so I opt to go with Cure for healing, Protect to raise defense, and Sleep to help deal with large groups of enemies. When we try to leave town, we're cut off by some soldiers who bring us to the king, and he tasks us with bringing back his daughter from the Chaos Shrine. So we head there and get a few random encounters on the way, which are no problem at all and give us a few level ups. When there, we run into Garland and immediately challenge him to a fight. This fight is mostly a joke. Garland, like many JRPG first bosses, isn't even really a boss. He's just a really tough enemy. He's vulnerable to many of the same debuffs and ailments that other bosses are immune to, and I take advantage of that. I use Sleep to force him to take a nap every turn, though there isn't much point in doing this because attacking him immediately wakes him up. After getting tired of that, no pun intended, I use Protect, but again, this isn't necessary because his attacks aren't even strong. Our attacks are doing anywhere from 15 to 35 damage each turn, usually somewhere in the mid-20s, so it does take a while to finish him, but without too much trouble, Garland eventually goes down. We take the princess back to the castle, and then the king sends us on our quest to restore light to the crystals. In order to help with that, the king orders that the broken bridge be rebuilt so that we can move on to the next continent. The soldiers start aggressively stroking the air, and the pieces just start to materialize until the bridge is complete. We move on, and at first the random encounters here give us a bit of trouble, but after a few level ups and equipment upgrades from the next town, they become manageable. In fact, speaking of upgrades, in the next town we're able to get our first set of level 2 magic, and I decide to go with Invis, which raises evasion, Blizzard so that I finally have some damaging magic, and Temper to raise my physical attack. Before we can do anything else, we have to beat up some pirates, which is easily done, and we do this so that we can get a ship that will give us access to much more of the world. But there are limitations because we can only park this thing at these white ports. So we sail to the southern side of the continent and reach the next town, Elfheim. The equipment here isn't really worth it, but the magic most definitely is. Here we can buy both level 3 and level 4 magic, though we spent most of our money on upgrades in the last town, so we do have to grind a bit. We don't have all the ones we're going to want, but we do get the most important ones before leaving. Those being Cura for healing, obviously, Thundara for an all-enemy hitting spell, which we definitely need since we're starting to see more and more encounters with several enemies, and Haste, which is arguably the best black magic spell in the game. It increases one ally's speed, but since this is just a plain old straight-up classic turn-based game without the active time battle system, it basically doubles the target's number of attacks, essentially doubling the damage, which is amazing. A lot of people say status buffs in JRPGs besides SMT are useless, but that's really not true. They've been useful in the Final Fantasy series as early as the first game, and you're doing yourself a disservice by not using them. After grinding a little more, we have all the spells we need. The ones that I buy are Poisona, which is pretty much mandatory since so many of the enemies here have attacks that poison you, and this is one of those games where poison persists outside of battle, and Fyra for some more multi-target elemental coverage. Now that we have all the spells we need and are a bit over-leveled, we head into the Marsh Cave on the bottom part of the continent. This is just an easy mini-dungeon with some slightly tougher but still easy enemies. From here we need to get the crown, and in front of the chest containing it is a tile with a guaranteed encounter with 2 Pisco demons, which hit pretty hard compared to other enemies we've run into so far, but not hard enough to pose much of a problem. And like the rest of the enemies here, they both go down in just 1 or 2 normal attacks. So we take the crown back up to the Western Keep where the king is just chilling, we give it to him, and he reveals himself to be the Dark Elf Astos and attacks us. Now, this is our first boss battle in quite a while, and the difficulty of this boss really just comes down to luck. In fact, in this case, it's painfully easy, except for the fact that he has the insta-kill move Death, which does exactly what I just said it does. He leads off with that on the first turn, and thankfully it misses. I take the first turn to set up Haste, followed by Invis to make his attacks less accurate. Even though damaging magic can't actually miss in this game, and he mostly uses magic, so that was kind of a waste of a turn, but after that I set up Temper for good measures, all while he's just using his weak normal attack. After that he uses Slowra, which would have been a problem if it hit, but it didn't, and then I get off my first attack, which does over 200 damage. He casts Haste on himself, and I hit him for another 200 plus damage, and then that's it, he's dead. I definitely over-prepared for that fight, but hey, we beat him. So we get the Crystal Eye, stop at Elfheim to learn one more spell, Sleepra, and then we need to sail all the way back up to the northern part of the continent and visit that cave that some of you may have stopped by on the way to Provoca, the one with that witch lady stumbling around. We give her the Crystal Eye so that she can see, and in return she gives us the Jolt Tonic, which we use on the Elf Prince to wake him up. So we go back to Elfheim to do just that, and he rewards us with the Mystic Key, which lets us open many locked doors that are scattered around in the early game areas. In fact, you probably ran into a few already. I definitely recommend going around and unlocking all the doors because behind many of them are chests that contain a lot of money and some very useful pieces of equipment. Although many of them the Red Mage can't actually use, but he can use the Rune Blade, the Werebuster, the Worm Killer, and the Mithril Mail. However, the only item that we actually need to progress in the game is the Nitro Powder, which we give to Narek the Dwarf, and he uses it to blast open a canal in the lower part of the continent, so we can now get outside of this sea that we're trapped in, and sail to the next town, Melmond, where, as per usual, there is more magic, and I go with Kiraga, Fyraga, and Slowra, which are the only ones I need, but they're also the only ones that the Red Mage can actually learn. Yeah, the Red Mage is already starting to fall behind the other classes in terms of capabilities, and we haven't even beaten the first major boss yet. Wow. But hey, if you got points toward any of your stats for looking the coolest, the Red Mage would be easily the most overpowered class in the game. Anyway, our next destination is the Cavern of the Earth, and the first major dungeon of the game. Now, there isn't much to say about the structure of this dungeon. It's just a linear cave with some branching pathways that lead to either nothing or treasure that isn't really worth it, well, besides the coral sword, but the enemies are actually quite tough. Despite how overleveled we currently are, the enemies are coming in big groups, and many of them are able to hit pretty hard and cause poison. They're also quite tanky. In fact, the Earth Elemental actually has more HP than the boss here. The most effective way to beat them is with magic, but by the time we reach the boss, we're pretty beat up and almost clean out of MP. Thankfully, we have an ether so we can get some of it back, but we do have to use some of it to heal ourselves to get back to a decent amount of HP. It would probably be better for me to leave the cave and heal up, but that would also require me to go back through the cavern and deal with all the random encounters, and I just don't want to deal with that. So, against my better judgment, I take on the boss. The giant bat from Castlevania. Oh, no, never mind, it's Alucard from Castlevania 3. And this is another dumb life or death luck boss. Here, it's because he has attacks that cause paralysis. Yeah, his gay skill does just this, but his normal attack can do it too. First attempt, he paralyzes me with his attack and then just beats me to death. His attack is pretty powerful too, sometimes doing over 100 damage, while ours are doing around 50 to 100-ish, or 120 if we get a critical hit. There's really not a lot to say. The only strategy is to just cross your fingers and hope he doesn't paralyze you. The only thing I can do that seems to help somewhat is cast Invis to reduce the odds of his attack hitting, but this is only so effective. It takes a few attempts for this reason, but thankfully this boss doesn't have a lot of HP. 280 to be exact, so that's about 4 or 5 hits to take him out, maybe 3 if we're lucky, but all it takes is one turn to get paralyzed, and it's basically a game over when that happens. But with enough trial and error, it is possible. So we open the chest behind him to get the Star Ruby. We make our way out of the dungeon, which is a lot easier said than done, but once we do make it out, we go to that one cave guarded by that stone giant, give him the ruby, and he lets us pass. And on the other side, we reach another cave where a sage gives us the earth rod, which allows us to go further in. So we gotta go back through the first couple of floors again, go through the next couple of floors where not much is different, and at the end we come face to face with the first major boss, or fiend, or whatever you want to call them. I don't give a who you are. I love that game. Okay, so the Lich may look intimidating, but he's really not bad, though I had quite a bit of trouble with him when I played this game for the first time as a kid. Because of this fear, I prepared more than I probably needed to. Right off the bat, I cast Protect on myself. The Lich attacks, and it barely puts a scratch on me. The next turn, I go for the Haste. He attacks, and it does even less. Next turn, he goes for Blizzara, and it actually does a decent amount, over 100. I use Temper, and now I'm ready to start dealing some damage. And my first attack does almost 400 damage. Turn after that, he goes for Sleepra, and it does hit and put me to sleep, but after that, he attacks, which wakes me up. I'm running a little low on HP, but I decide to keep attacking. My next attack does a little under 300, the one after that does a bit over 350, his attack misses, I attack again for 431 damage, and that's it. The Red Mage has successfully defeated the Lich all by himself. We go up to the giant crystal, hold up our smaller crystal, and it lights up yellow. So yeah, first major dungeon is out of the way, and the statue blocking the entrance to the Earthgift Shrine is gone too. That's one of the bonus dungeons, but we're not going to go there just yet. We're going to continue with the main quest for now, and thankfully we don't have to do nearly as much as we did for this one before the next dungeon. In fact, we can almost just head straight there, but there are a few small tasks we need to do. First of all, we need to head to Crescent Lake, which is in the southeastern corner of the world, and as usual, we can upgrade our equipment here. In fact, here we buy the first shield that's usable by the Red Mage, the Buckler, and also upgrade our magic. Well, at least we try to, but the Red Mage can't actually learn a single spell here, at least not for right now. What we can do, though, is head through the secret pathway to this circle of sages, one of whom gives us a canoe that lets us move over the shallow water. With it, we follow the river to the next dungeon, Mount Golg, which is a very weird name for a volcano, but in this dungeon, most of the floor is literally hot lava, and you take damage when you walk over it, which you have to do, but at least it doesn't deal a whole lot of damage. Now, theoretically, you can complete this dungeon and reach the boss pretty quickly, but you won't want to because there is some pretty good loot scattered around in here, including the Ice Brand, which is not only the best sword usable by the Red Mage at this point, but it deals ice elemental damage, and I don't think I need to tell you why that's important, especially in this dungeon. Before too long, we make it to the last floor and come face to face with Marlith, who I'm actually not too worried about. She's more of a physical attacker than the Lich, with her attacks hitting several times. I mean, what else would you expect? Just look at her. So, for good measures, I set up a Protect at the start of battle, followed by an Invis. Her Fyra is doing about 100, while her attack is doing around 500 to 200 damage. It's more than I would like, but it's manageable. After healing, I set up a haste, and then a temper, and then attack for over 400 damage again. It's all thanks to the Ice Brand that I'm able to do this much, and while she attacks, casts spells, and tries to darken me in vain, I land 3 more hits, and that is more than enough to take her out. So we restore color to the red crystal this time. The entrance to the Hellfire Chasm opens, but before we start tackling the optional dungeons, there is one more mini dungeon that we need to clear, the Ice Cavern. What we need here is the Levy Stone, which we take to the desert, and it gives us the iconic airship. Now we can go just about anywhere, although the game is pretty strict about where we can park this thing. Only over grass, basically. But we can head over to Gaia, which isn't actually supposed to be accessed until much later, but there's nothing stopping us from going there now, and here we can buy the Ruby Armlet and Protect Ring. The Ruby Armlet is a decent piece of armor usable by every class, but the Protect Ring is very important because it protects its holder from instant death. It's expensive, but we only need one. And once we're geared up here, we fly over to the Citadel of Trials, a dungeon that's technically optional, but it may as well be mandatory for reasons you'll soon find out. The dungeon itself is just an easy teleporter dungeon with some tough, but still pretty easy enemies. And at the end, we get the Rat's Tail, which we bring to Bahamut on the Cardia Islands, and he upgrades the party's classes. Warriors become knights, thieves become ninjas, monks become masters, and white, black, and red mages become wizards. This is especially beneficial in our case because many of the spells that were unlearnable in the towns that we recently visited are now learnable, and we can use some new equipment too. And with this, I think it's a good time to go and explore the first bonus dungeon, the Earthgift Shrine. If you ask me, these new dungeons are where the real meat of this game is because, let's be honest, this is not a hard game. But these dungeons and the bosses that are fought in them provide a new challenge that really forces you to understand and make use of this game's mechanics. I also just like how downright strange these dungeons are. For one thing, you go through the same floors every time, but the order you do them is completely random, and some of them do not look or play like they belong in said dungeon. Like, the first floor I have to go through in the Earthgift Shrine is a freaking haunted forest where the only way forward is by talking to these NPCs and initiating encounters with them. And then the last one is this giant open desert where you have to just figure out where to go, and it only gets weirder in the dungeons after this. The item rewards are pretty good too. In fact, here we find the Elven Cloak, which is the best shield equipable by the Red Wizard. However, with this being the first of these dungeons, it's pretty short, and at the end, we choose to fight one of 4 bosses, all of which are brought over from Final Fantasy III. You'll actually see that all of these optional dungeons feature bosses from other 2D Final Fantasy games. These are all about equally difficult, so I guess I'll go with Cerberus. Now, Cerberus doesn't have much in the way of variety with his attacks, but they do hit pretty hard. His only magic attack is Thunderbolt, but it takes away over half of my Red Wizard's health. This is an amount I can heal off, but I can't heal every turn and attack at the same time. However, in this dungeon, I did find an item called the Blue Curtain, which casts Null Shock, which reduces all incoming electric damage by half, which is exactly what I need to beat this boss. With this, his Thunderbolt is doing under 150, while his normal attack does a little over 50 after a Protect. With the Haste and Temper combo, my attacks are doing well over 400 damage most of the time, sometimes over 500. This may sound like a lot, and it is, but these optional bosses are much tankier than the mandatory ones. Cerberus has 4,000 HP, which is more than double what Marlith had. but even with all that HP, after my defenses are set up and my attack buffs applied, it's pretty much a wrap. He can't do anything besides attack or use Thunderbolt, so as long as I heal with Curaga when my HP gets low, I won't die, and all I have to do is keep swinging at him until his HP reaches 0, and after not too many turns, that's exactly what happens. For beating him, we get the Kotetsu, which is usable by the Red Wizard, but not as good as the Ice Brand, so I'm just going to leave it in my inventory. On my way to the next dungeon, I make sure to stop by Crescent Lake and get some spells that I couldn't learn as a mage but can as a wizard, including Protera and Invisora, which have the same respective effects as Protect and Invis, but are applied to the whole party, which may sound pointless given that this is a solo run, but they actually are slightly more effective than those spells, so yeah. I also teach myself Thundaga because why not? Alright, now onto the next optional dungeon, the Hellfire Chasm. Not much happens in the floors leading up to the boss, but this dungeon actually has 2 boss floors, and they both have a choice to fight one of 2 bosses. This time they're from FF4, and for the first boss, I opt to fight Cognazo. This guy has a little more variety with his moves. His main and most problematic one is Tsunami, which is a powerful magic attack that I can't shield myself from with any of the Curtains or Null skills because this one is non-elemental, and to me it does a little under half. He also has Haste and Curaga, making him one of the few bosses that can heal himself, but it's not by a great amount. And Haste doesn't really do much because his normal attack isn't very strong, nor does it hit very many times. The strategy here is the same as always. Protect at the start, buff up with Haste and Temper, and once I start attacking, I'm doing around 900 and sometimes over 1,000 damage with each attack, which is insane. Like I said, he can heal, but only by about 400 whenever he uses Curaga, and a turn he uses that is a turn he can't attack, which leaves him vulnerable. So basically, all I need to do is make sure to keep my HP high enough to survive a Tsunami while attacking whenever I can. And this strategy works, and it finishes him off. Okay, now the next set of floors in this dungeon are where things start to get really, really weird. And no, I'm not talking about the ordinary caves without lava. I'm talking about the part where I'm taken to a floor that looks like the overworld, where there's a ship. And we can also get the airship in the Hellfire Chasm. What is this doing down here? Is this supposed to be an illusion? Is this canon? It's never explained. A few floors after that, we are on the last set of bosses, and I have a choice of who to fight again. I can fight the giant sexy cave lady, or I can fight the freaky fire demon. Well, the freaky fire demon has a chest behind him, and he drops an item I can actually use, so I'm gonna fight him. And this guy is a major step up in difficulty from the last boss. For one thing, he hits much harder. His normal attack does around 300 damage, more than Cognazo's Tsunami, but he also has a special magic attack called Scorch, which usually deals over 400 damage. Almost enough to kill me in one hit. This fight is just not going to be possible under these conditions, so is there anything I can do? Well, I do have a red curtain which halves the damage from his Scorch, but even with that, it still deals a lot, and I can also stack Protera multiple times to protect against his normal attack, but that's going to take up a lot of turns, but it also may be my only option, so let's try it. First turn, I set up a red curtain, and right after that, I start spamming Protera. Now, he also has Firaga, which is easily his weakest attack, so every turn, I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping he uses that. Whenever my HP gets low, I heal, and whenever my HP is high enough to take an attack or two, I use Protera. And it does take a while before I start noticing results, but after about a dozen or so Proteras, I do start to see them, and after a few more, I'm able to shrug off his physical attacks like they're nothing. Scorch, on the other hand, there's not much I can do about that besides setting up Null Blaze. I mean, again, even with Null Blaze, it still does a lot, and even if I had multiple red curtains, they can't stack, so all I can do about that is just hope he doesn't use it, and heal it off when he does. There are a few points throughout the battle where I decide that it's better to heal with items, since Kiraga only heals me by about half right now. Not to mention, I actually do get low on MP once, forcing me to use an elixir, but situations like this are exactly what elixirs are for. I lose track of how many turns pass before I'm actually able to set up my buffs and attack, and when I do, my attacks are dealing a little over 500, which isn't as much as I was hoping. I mean, this thing has 15,000 HP, so yeah, that's about 30 or so attacks, but sometimes it's 700 or 800, which is better. This is really not a fun fight. Like, I have to heal almost every other turn, pretty much after every Scorch or every 2 Fyras or normal attacks. I go through several valuable items, and with how much HP he has, it just takes forever. It's doable, just not very enjoyable. And for beating him, we're rewarded with the Kikuichi Monji, a weapon that's supposed to be used by the ninja, but actually is usable by the Red Wizard. In fact, it's our best weapon right now, but also in the chest behind it is a ribbon. This is an essential item. It's a piece of headwear that doesn't provide much in the way of pure damage reduction, but it does have a hidden effect that reduces all elemental damage. And since the Red Wizard can't use very many helmets anyway, this is perfect for him. Okay, that was quite a detour, but now we can get back to the main quest. Although, before doing that, we should probably backtrack to some of the earlier towns so that I can teach my Red Wizard all the null elemental spells so that we don't find ourselves in another situation where we need to reduce elemental damage but don't have any curtains. Anyway, what we have to do now is head to this inconspicuous patch of sand in the northwestern continent to buy a bottled fairy from this caravan. We take it to Gaia, and the fairy flies out and gives us the Ox Yale, which lets us breathe underwater. We go to Onrock, get inside this yellow submarine, not to live though, just to take it to the Sunken Shrine, which is the next major dungeon in the game, and it's actually pretty easy. I mean, the layout is somewhat confusing, assuming you're getting everything that you need from here, which is not something I am doing at the moment, and I will soon regret it, but there is a lot of good treasure here, like the Diamond Armlet, and the very important Giant's Gloves. They're not equipable by the Red Mage, so why are they important? Well, you may have noticed that some items have descriptions that say, casts X when used. Well, in this game, any item can be used from the item selection screen, and these items do exactly what they say they do. So, with one of these, you basically gain the ability to use that spell with any class, for free, an unlimited number of times. And the Giant's Gloves cast Saber when used. Saber is especially important because it provides a greater boost to physical attack than Temper, but it only works on the user and is only usable by the Black Wizard, so it's kinda useless in that regard, but this lets us completely remove that restriction and get full use out of it. And with that, I think we're good to challenge the boss now, the Kraken. This boss plays very similarly to Marlith, a mostly physical attacker with a few spells, and by a few spells, I mean one, Ink, which is supposed to blind the targets, but it doesn't. I set up Protera at the start, but not before he's able to get off an attack that takes off more than half of my HP. I set up another Protera just to be on the safe side, and then I buff up with Haste and Saber. My first attack does over 600 damage, all while he continues to use his now weak attack and horribly inaccurate Ink attack. My next attack does over 900 damage, and the one after that also does over 900, and yeah, he's done. So we restore the big blue crystal, and now we have to go to the waterfall cave to get the warp cube from some robot. But before we can move on, there's something we're missing. Yeah, that essential key item that I forgot to pick up from the Sunken Shrine is the Rosetta Stone. So I go back and get it and give it to this scholarly looking dude in Melmond who teaches us how to speak Lufinian. And from one of the NPCs there, we get the chime. Now we have to go to the Mirage Tower, where there is a whole lot of really good treasure scattered around. After reaching the top, we're taken to the Flying Fortress, the last of the 4 Fiend dungeons, although this is really more of a treasure trove than a dungeon. It's pretty short and the design is really simple, but there are a lot of good items here. Even the enemy drops are getting better. Like, from one of the enemies we find the Deathbringer, one of the few weapons that's only usable by the Red Wizard, but it's not as good as what we have, so it's just going to chill in our inventory. I wouldn't be surprised if, when this game was being made, this was a case where the developers were running out of time, so they had to rush the last dungeons and couldn't figure out where to place all the high-tier items, so they just placed them all in a bunch of chests in the last 2 dungeons. But yeah, I think we're good to take on the boss now, and that boss is Tiamat. And this boss, I'm really not worried about. In none of my previous playthroughs of this game, even when I was a kid, did I ever have any trouble with Tiamat. After the obligatory Protera, I immediately start buffing with Haste and Saber. She has some magic attacks that barely do anything. She has Cerberus's Thunderbolt, which is nowhere near as strong, and she goes for her normal attack a few times, but almost all of them get blocked. After I buff up when I start attacking, I'm doing around 5, 6, sometimes 700 damage, about the same amount I was to the Kraken, and because she's also pretty weak, it only takes 4 hits to bring her down. So there you go, that is all 4 Fiends defeated and all 4 major mandatory dungeons completed. Now we have to go visit the Chaos Shrine, but before we do that, I think it's a good time to go visit those 2 other optional dungeons. And I'm actually going to start with the Whisperwind Cove, which just opened up. Even though this is meant to be the last Soul of Chaos dungeon, I actually think the bosses in the other one are harder, so we're going to do this one first. Not only so that we're higher level for the other one, but also so that we can use the items that we get in here, of which there are some really good ones. And here, the weirdness is cranked up well beyond 11. The 3rd floor is a forest with the spirits of enemies we've been fighting throughout the game. The 4th is a scavenger hunt where you need to help out dwarves by giving them items given to you by other dwarves after you help them, and the 8th is this town where you have to find some kid that meets the description given by the kid in the house. The 10th floor, this is the boss floor, and thankfully there's only one boss to fight on each of these floors, and on this one is Typhon from Final Fantasy VI. This fight is a complete joke because he only has one attack, Snort, which is an insta-kill attack, but I have the Protect Ring, so it can't actually do anything to me. At least that's what I thought when I was playing, but according to the Final Fantasy Wiki, the Protect Ring doesn't actually help because supposedly Snort is non-elemental, but whatever the case, it doesn't hit me. He just keeps spamming it and it just keeps doing nothing, and he only attacks occasionally. And his attack does about 150 damage, but at this point, I'm completely maxed out on HP, so that's really not a lot. After buffing, my attacks are doing around 400 to 600 damage with each hit, and because he has 10,000 HP, it does take a good amount of hits to bring him down, but with almost no effort, it does happen. He just keeps snorting, and I just keep swinging, and it probably would have helped if I had buffed up a 2nd time with Saber, maybe a 3rd time, but whatever the case, this is still an incredibly easy fight, and we're able to bring him down very easily. Alright, what kind of floors is the dungeon gonna throw at us this time? How about a floor with a bunch of white and black mages walking around that can teach you magic? In fact, here, you can get every spell in the game. Not that I need any, because I already have what I need, and yeah, actually that's it before the next boss, Ultros. The best way I can describe Ultros is he's like the Kraken on steroids. His only move is Ink, which just doesn't connect, but his normal attack does hit a lot harder, usually doing over 500 damage, which is more than half my max health. But there is an easy solution, just setting up Protera a whole bunch of times. So once I buff up my defenses enough that I'm taking less than 100 damage from his attacks, I then start attacking and I'm doing some pretty good damage. Well over 1,000, sometimes over 1,500 with a critical hit, and with that, it's pretty much over. His attack is now weak, and his other move does absolutely nothing, so after about a dozen or so hits, he gets taken out. So we have some more floors, and one of them is an overworld that's set in the sky. Yeah, but probably the weirdest one of all is actually the third boss floor. As soon as you enter, you start to hear the game over theme, and you're walking around this ruined village where everyone seems to be in pain. I mean, why is there a village 3/4 of the way deep inside this dungeon? Are these people even real? And what could be causing all this? Well, that's none other than the boss itself, the Phantom Train, and unfortunately, we can't suplex this thing, but we can slash at it, or attempt to. This thing is actually a huge step up in difficulty from the last two bosses. This thing's attack hits even harder than Ultros. The first one does over 500 damage. I mean, it makes sense, it's a freaking train after all. I can counter this with Proteras, but his other attack, Acid Rain, I can't do anything about due to it being non-elemental. On top of that, this thing's defenses are pretty high. A haste and saber boosted attack is doing around 700 in most cases, but this thing also only has 10,000 HP. Acid Rain is really what makes this fight difficult. 200 damage may not seem like a lot, but my best healing spell, Kiraga, only heals about 350 HP when it's used. So basically, let's do some math here. 2 Kiragas heals off a little over 3 of his Acid Rains, and it takes 2 Kiragas to heal off a single physical attack. So basically, what I need to do is pray to RNGesus that he mostly uses Acid Rain so that I can cast Protera once every 3 turns, the one turn that I don't need to heal, so that I can start tanking his physical attacks, so that on turns where he does that, I can set up my offensive buffs and then start attacking. Even though I don't actually use Protera as much as I probably should have. I probably thought this was a good idea because the Phantom Train doesn't actually attack that often. He pretty much spams Acid Rain every turn, only attacking occasionally. So I guess RNGesus granted my wish, which is good for setting up, but it's actually not good after I set up because Protera doesn't protect against Acid Rain, and that kind of defeats the purpose. But I mean, even when he uses nothing but Acid Rain, I can still use that free third turn I have to set up my offenses, as well as attack. Whatever the case though, this strategy is at least effective enough for me to scrape by and defeat the Phantom Train. Once he's defeated, the village instantly gets restored back to how it was. The people are no longer sick, the flowers are blooming, all the gravestones have been removed, and now we can move on. And that's pretty much it for all the weird floors that are worth talking about. Before too long, we make it to the 40th floor, and here we fight the super boss, Deathgaze. This freaking boss. Even though he's not the hardest boss in the game in my opinion, he might just be the hardest one for this challenge. Deathgaze has a variety of attacks, most of which are insta-kill moves, which should be a good thing since I don't have to worry about them thanks to the Protect Ring, but he also has Dispel, which removes any elemental resistances, but I'm not actually sure how effective it is since it doesn't seem to make a difference. But either way, he's programmed to use his normal attack a lot more, and his normal attack hits like a freight train. No, it hits like a freaking meteor because it's stronger than the normal attack of the actual freight train. It sometimes deals over 600 damage, and while I can raise my defense against his physical attack with Protera, chances are I'll be dead before I can raise it enough to make a difference. One option is to try to reduce his number of attacks with Slowra, which can hit bosses, but you're more likely to encounter a horde of all shiny Pokemon than have this move hit a boss. I try raising my evasion with Invisira instead, and that doesn't work. The only thing that does seem to work is just soft resetting until I get an encounter where he doesn't lead off with a physical attack and doesn't go for it until I'm able to set up enough Proteras to reduce his physical damage by a good amount. And it does take a while, but eventually it does happen. In my successful attempt, the first turn he goes for Dispel. I set up a Protera, and while he does follow it up with an attack, the turn after that he goes for Death, which misses. I use an Elixir to heal because I'm out of X potions, and he attacks again. After that, I use another Protera, he attacks, then he uses Kill, but it doesn't work, and I use Protera again, and I keep using it over and over again, and I am starting to notice his physical attacks getting weaker. I do need to fully heal myself a second time, and since I don't have any more elixirs, I have no choice but to use a mega elixir. But by this point, I've buffed up my defense enough that his attacks are now doing damage in the double digits. And with that, I can now start setting up my offenses with Haste and Saber. And for good measures, I actually set up Saber twice, but I don't think that's going to be enough because when I attack with it, it only does about 300 damage. Nowhere near as much as I was expecting, and this thing has 30,000 HP. And apparently with that 300 I just got lucky. Sometimes my attack does less than 100. I used Saber 3 more times and now we're in business. My attacks are now doing well over 1,000 damage, sometimes almost 2,000, all while his attacks are barely able to put a dent in me. All I need to do now is just keep swinging at him until he's dead. For beating him, we get the Lightbringer, which is the best weapon that's exclusive to the Red Wizard. But that's not actually the best weapon that we get from this dungeon. That would be the Ultima weapon, a weapon usable by all upgraded classes, whose damage depends on the user's max HP. And since I'm already maxed out on HP, this weapon is already at its full potential with a base power of 119. And it's perfect for what we're about to do next, the Lifespring Grotto. And we have some interesting floors here, like this one where we have to walk across flashing tiles. If we go off the path, we're sent back to the beginning of the floor. Also, on the first boss floor, there's a town of mermaids who are trying to contain one of my favorite bosses in the series, Gilgamesh. Given that I've had a much easier time with this boss at lower levels, going in I wasn't expecting much, until he hits me for over 500 damage, so I guess now I'm going to need to set up Protera like I did before. He does have quite a few other moves, like Wind Slash, which is a weak multi-target physical attack, and Excalibur, which always deals 1 damage. Yeah, it's a reference to one of his joke battles in Final Fantasy V, but he also has some defensive moves too, like Null All and Protect. After the usual setup of Haste and Saber, I'm dealing almost 3,000 damage with my attacks, and this is also after he sets up some Protects of his own. He does go for a Protect again, which cuts my damage output by about 500, but this doesn't make much of a difference, and after a couple more attacks, he goes down. Some floors later, and we meet Atmos. Once again, I go in not expecting much because I've never had trouble with this boss before, and this time I was actually right to have these expectations. Atmos' normal attack hardly does anything, and while he does have some decently strong magic attacks, Firaga and Comet, they're not as strong as Gilgamesh's normal attack, only doing about 300, which sounds like it could be a problem because that's almost as much as I'm able to heal off with Kiraga, but he actually seems to favor his signature skill, Wormhole. This is an insta-kill move, meaning it doesn't do anything thanks to the Protect Ring. After setting up Haste and a couple of Sabers, I'm able to do about 2,000 to 3,000 damage with my attacks each turn, and after a few turns of that, while stopping to heal when necessary, Atmos goes down. And for beating him, we get the Judgment Staff, which casts Flare when equipped. Flare is the strongest magic attack that's usable by the party in the game, and it's normally only learnable by the Black Wizard, but this staff lets us use it as the Red Wizard. A few not so interesting floors later, and we make it to the final boss room. And here, we have a choice of fighting either Omega or Shinryu. Both of these are extremely hard super bosses that have made even the most seasoned players give up, but Shinryu is slightly harder, so I'll fight him. Shinryu is a combination of many of the things that have made other fights in this game difficult. He has a strong physical attack and a wide variety of magic attacks, some of which are non-elemental, but even the ones that are elemental are still pretty strong. Flare is his strongest attack, and it does about 350 damage, which is the exact same amount I'm able to heal each turn. So it basically just takes away a turn from me when I'm setting up. His other move, Tidal Wave, usually does a little under 300, while his other skills, Ice Storm and Thunderbolt, do around 200 to 250 damage before Null All. The first thing to do is set up a light curtain to cast Null All to protect myself against his elemental attacks, and then start setting up Proteras. His physical attack isn't quite as strong as that of the previous bosses, but getting my defenses high enough is still important because being able to shake off his physical attacks means that I don't have to heal on turns he does that, and I can use them for other things. It also helps that I'm able to block a good amount of his physical attacks with my cloak. I spend probably the first 3/4 of this fight just setting up, and most of that 3/4 isn't even spent setting up, it's just spent healing. I couldn't even tell you how many times I had to cast Curaga, nor could I tell you how many Proteras I set up, but it's a long while before I start setting up Haste and Saber, and even that gets interrupted by the need to heal a lot. But of course, when I do set up Saber, I don't do it just once. I do it 3 times because I want to make this whole thing worth it, and my first attack does over 3,000 damage, along with the next one, and after that it's anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000. Either way, it's a lot of damage, and it's only a matter of attacking while sometimes stopping to heal until he's defeated, and it does not take long at all to bring him down. Look at that, we beat one of the hardest bosses in the series with a single member of the worst class in the game. We may have our level almost maxed out at 99 with some of the best equipment in the game, but we did it. Now there's only, well, 2 things to do actually, but they're both in the same place. First of all, in Cornelia, you may notice this weird faceless figure that just walks away when you talk to it. After doing so, go to the Chaos Shrine, and they'll open up a secret door in the back. Follow them in, and you'll be brought to the new dungeon that was added for the PSP version. Now this dungeon is pretty interesting. You're sent through a series of floors with puzzles, but unlike the other puzzles in the dungeons in this game, these are actually pretty complicated and may require you to refer to notes in order to solve them. On top of that, you're timed, and you can influence how much time you're given by sacrificing abilities. Like, for example, you can forfeit the ability to run away or use magic for extra time, stuff like that. It's definitely an interesting way to add challenge to the game, but some of these puzzles are a little more complex than they need to be. Like, for one of them, I have to watch a group of NPCs walk across the screen, and then I'm given a certain amount of gil, and I have to buy flowers from them while spending exactly the amount of gil that I was given. And that's to say nothing of the random encounters here. Like, I'm almost level 99, and I can barely survive most of these encounters. And even though I can defeat them, it's really just not worth it. I just run away from most of them. But the real challenge is with the boss. This game's ultimate boss, Chronodia. This thing is a combination of every major boss in this game on super steroids, and she actually has multiple forms, and this is her strongest one. The form you fight is dependent on how well you did the puzzles in the dungeon leading up to her. If you make it through all the puzzle floors without making a single mistake, she'll be at her strongest. And that's exactly what happened, so we're going to be fighting her in her most powerful form. Where do I even start? Well, how about with her normal attack that hits for over 1,000 damage? Yeah, that's going to make things a little difficult. I mean, I can try setting up Protera, but how am I supposed to do that when I can't even survive a single hit? Even if I am able to buff my defenses up to a point where I can survive, I'll still need to get them to a point where I can heal them off, and there's no telling how many turns that's going to take. Is it even possible? Yes, but it requires an incredible amount of luck. It's basically a worse version of the situation with Death Gaze. I have to cross my fingers and hope that for the first several turns of the fight, she doesn't use her normal attack and uses her much weaker magic attacks instead. But even then, she knows Flare, although that's the only non-elemental spell she has. The others are the same elemental magic spells used by this game's 4 Fiends, and they don't do nearly as much damage. And she also has all the status and insta-kill attacks that don't do anything either. Although she does have a few status moves of her own, like Seal, Slow, Stop, Warp, and Haste. And Seal seems to be her favorite one, and it actually does connect a couple of times. What it does is it seals one of your commands, either magic or attack. It's not actually that much of a problem though, because when this happens and it seals magic, I can still heal myself with the Rune Staff, which casts Heal Lara when used, and that heals almost half as much as Curaga. I would be able to cast Protect on myself too if I had the Murasame, but that's only dropped by Omega and I didn't fight him. I fought Shinryu, but the effect of Seal doesn't last that long anyway. The early part of this fight is the most brutal, for reasons I just mentioned, but thankfully, in my successful attempt, by the time I take her first attack, I've set up enough Proteras that it's taking away less than half of my health, but that's still way more than I wanted to. I actually have to resort to using items to heal a few times, and my only options for that are elixirs and mega elixirs, which I don't have a lot of. Eventually, after maybe like 20 or 30 Proteras, my defenses are high enough that her normal attack is now doing less than 100 damage, which is enough for me to feel safe to start buffing. Although, when I'm ready to do that, my magic is sealed, so I instead use the Hermes shoes to cast haste, and then as usual, I buff my attack with the Giant's gloves, which I do twice. My first attack does 1500, which is actually more than the ones that follow it, which do like 12 to 800 damage, which isn't bad, but I want more. So I buff up with Saber 2 more times, and while I'm doing this, I get inflicted with Seal again, and it disables my attack this time. So I set up another Protera just to be safe, then heal, then start attacking again for around 1 to 2,000 damage, but sometimes 2,500 or 3,000 if I'm lucky, and I don't think it's necessary to buff anymore after this. At this point, the only attack of hers that I really have to worry about is Flare, but she doesn't even go for it that much. It's mostly just weak magic and ailment attacks that don't do anything, like Poison Gas and Ink, and sometimes Warp, which is an instant death attack that doesn't work, and after I start attacking again, it's only a short time before she's defeated. Our reward for beating her is the Barbarian Sword, the strongest weapon in the game, and one that's usable by only the Warrior and Red Mage classes. Now, there's only one thing left to do: finish the game. We go back to the main area of the Chaos Shrine and use the crystals on the blue orb thingy in the middle, and it warps us back in time to the final dungeon. This dungeon is a lot harder than the mandatory ones, but it's a lot easier than the optional one. And there aren't any weird gimmicks or anything, just rematches against the 4 Fiends, but these are incredibly easy and not even worth talking about. The enemies encountered here are also pretty tough and come in big numbers, but in nearly every case I can just obliterate them by casting Flare with the Judgment Staff, and while here, I do reach level 99. After the last Fiend has been defeated, we make it to Garland, who transforms into Chaos, this game's final boss, and I don't really think there's all that much to say. We have some of the best defensive equipment, the best weapon in the game, and we've already beaten the hardest super boss in the game. I don't think we have much to worry about. And we don't. His normal attack is pretty powerful, but not enough to one-shot me. But I do set up a few Proteras just to be safe. After that, I set up Haste, followed by 5 Sabers, while he chips away at my health. My first attack does over 4,000 damage, and from there, they do at least 3,500. I think it goes without saying, but it doesn't take very long to take out this boss after that. Chaos may be the final boss, he may have some really strong magic, and he may have a really strong physical attack, but we have beaten optional bosses that are much harder. Honestly, I think it would have been kind of cool if, if you beat them, you'd fight like a stronger version of Chaos, but that's not the case. I mean, the Barbarian Sword that we got from Chronodia pretty much only exists to make this fight even easier. Because, yeah, some of the other optional bosses are harder, but Chronodia is the ultimate boss. By the time you've beaten her, you've probably already beat all the other super bosses. So, there's really nothing else to do in the game but just wail on this boss and watch him go down. And doing it with, like I said in the beginning, my personal favorite, but also debatably the worst class in the game, is just extremely satisfying to me. And without any difficulty at all, we bring Chaos down. So yeah, the one Warrior of Light saved the world, and they all lived happily ever after. And there you have it, everyone. It is more than possible to beat Final Fantasy I on the PSP and all of its bonus content with a single Red Mage. I made this video because I wanted to do something different. I'm still kind of feeling a little burned out with Atlas and SMT and Persona right now, so I want to try making these challenge videos for other JRPGs. Let me know if y'all like this video, and if you want to see more Final Fantasy content, be sure to check out my other links in the description. And until the next video, I will see you all later.